Okay, so thank you very much for that lovely introduction. Let me just share my screen here.
Yeah.
So you
Perfect.
can see that, right? Yeah.
Perfect. Yes.
Okay, so warm greetings from Scotland to all attendees. I'm Harsh. I'm a PhD student at the University of Edinburgh. I'm working with two-dimensional van der Waals magnets for potential applications in next-generation storage and computing technologies. And today, I want to give you a brief look at field-dependent control of chiral spin textures in chromium tribromide, primarily from a simulation perspective. So, just very briefly, why study chiral spin textures? Why are they of interest to magnetism researchers? Um, so, well, chirality is ubiquitously present in nature and provides a very natural two-state degree of freedom. Researchers are already leveraging chirality in other fields. We base devices on light polarization, circular polarization. We exploit the natural helicity of DNA for medicinal purposes, etc. And in magnetism particularly, chiral textures take the form of textures such as fermions, merons, and other topologically protected textures. And these have immense potential applications in memory, data storage, computing devices, and therefore it's important that we characterize them thoroughly. So the question then arises, why chromium tribromide in particular? So chromium tribromide belongs to a class of 2D van der Waals insulating ferromagnets, and it has recently been shown to be able to forge a large variety of spin textures tunable by sample thickness. So over here, as you can see, I hope you can see my cursor as well. So over
Yes.
here you can see a lattice of nails fermions stabilized at lower thicknesses, and over here you see a lattice of blocks fermions stabilized by a higher sample thickness. And this has been shown by in this publication by Grabenchik and co-authors. So a particularly interesting aspect of these findings is this formation of this nail type fermions at low thicknesses and block type fermions at high thicknesses. And 2D magnets in general have become very promising candidates for advanced spintronics due to their demonstrably higher magnetic stability, tensile strength, and other desirable mechanical and electrical properties. So we mostly use micromagnetic simulations to model these textures. And just as a very brief overview, the key assumption in micromagnetics is that two macro spins that are placed close together can be assumed to be parallel due to exchange interactions, and so we can discretize and so we can model a discrete magnetic field as a continuous vector field. And the dynamics of these spins are given by the Landau-Lifshitz-Gilbert equation, as we all know, where the effective field term can contain all the various interactions as the exchange, the Zeeman, the self-coupling, and so on. And for most of these simulations have been undertaken by using the MuMax simulation software, which is a fast GPU accelerated micromagnetic simulation software developed at Kent University. These fermion ground states were generally obtained by relaxing under high damping under an out-of-plane magnetic field of around 50 millitesla in this case. So chromium tribromide has generally a very rich phase diagram with multiple possible spin textures, but for this talk I want to focus on primarily two of these energy states, which is a block fermion and a topologically trivial type 2 bubble. So the general color scheme here is that the dark regions represent an into the plane magnetization, the white regions would represent an out of the plane magnetization, and the red RGB color scheme represents an in plane magnetization of these spins. And generally the energy landscape of these textures is that the clockwise and counterclockwise or left and right-handed blocks fermions are degenerate, and they are separated by an energy barrier, and this sort of at a higher energy sit the type 2 bubbles. And we have found that in general this energy barrier between the left and right-handed blocks fermions can be controlled by applying an in-plane magnetic field. So right, so let's see how we can sort of control the formation of these type 2 bubbles. So on the left here, we have the ground state lattice of Bloch's fermions. And we'll see how, with the application of an in-plane field, we can convert these to this sort of topologically trivial type 2 bubble. So in the middle, you should now be able to see this animation running, where you can see that as we increase the in-plane field, the Bloch's fermions have been converted to have this type 2 structure. And it's good to note here that they've also sort of elongated a little bit in length. And overall, what we find is that this sort of transition between the Bloch's fermions and the type 2 bubbles, yeah. So this sort of transition between the fermions and type 2 bubbles follows, you can create a phase diagram where at high values of the out of plane field, you have primarily Bloch's fermions, and as you increase the in plane field, you get this type 2 bubble. And this also follows, there is a strong agreement between the experimental and theoretical results, where you can see that the application of an in-plane field stabilizes the type 2 bubble by lowering the energy barrier between the mixed chirality Bloch states. So now we want to consider, okay, what are what are the effects of DMI and other interactions taking place as we apply this in-plane field, and what stabilizes these textures to form these type 2 bubbles in the way that they do. So one way to do this is by doing a sort of a partial hysteresis, where we apply an in-plane field and then we reduce the in-plane component back to 0. So on the left here, again, we start with a Bloch's fermion lattice, and in particular, I want to bring your attention to these 3 fermions along this off diagonal here. Okay, I'm hoping you can see this cursor. So the remaining fermions, you will notice, are all clockwise, but these 3 fermions are counterclockwise. And as I run the simulation and introduce an in-plane component, we see that, okay, so they all turn into this sort of type 2 bubble. And somewhere around 50 milliteslas in plane, this is the maximum saturation for all of them to turn into type 2 bubbles. And from this point, we now reduce the in-plane component back to 0. So as we do that, you will notice something very interesting happening. So now as we reduce this component back to 0, you can see here, so this is the state that is formed. These 3 fermions in particular have not returned to their original state. However, the rest of the clockwise fermions have returned back to their original state. So this demonstrates a sort of reversible control over these states. And so these 3 fermions, why have they not returned to their counterclockwise state? And we can see that by doing a sort of analysis of the DMI interactions in opposition with the Zeeman torque. So we see that for these left-handed or counterclockwise bubbles, they switch to the type 2 bubbles at very slightly lower values of the in-plane field, and this is because the DMI torque sort of assists the formation of this type 2 bubbles a little stronger than it does for the clockwise case. So as we look through the layers of these textures, we see that the top layer of the type 2 bubble will switch at slightly lower values of the in-plane field, and they will create a sort of Bloch point in the entire fermion tube texture, whereas this does not occur for the clockwise or right-handed fermions due to the way that the DMI interplays with the Zeeman torque. And you can see that as we look through the layers of the sample, we see that, you know, this is sort of corroborated, where we see that those 3 fermions in particular, the counterclockwise ones, they are more symmetrical as compared to the clockwise bubbles, because of the way that this DMI assists the formation of the type 2 bubbles for the counterclockwise fermions. So we can also test this by saying that, okay, so what happens if we were to ignore DMI in the sample, and we say that, you know, we only want to try and introduce this in-plane component in the absence of DMI. So on the left here, we stabilize ground states fermion lattice without DMI. So these are stabilized mostly by dipolar interactions. And as we run the simulation, we can see that they all switch to this sort of type 2 state almost immediately at the same time for some critical value of the in-plane field. Another effect of DMI in this material is that it also gives a preferential chirality to the system, where you can see here on the top. So if we try to generate 20 different ground states in chromium tribromide without DMI, we see that there is an overlap between the left and right-handed chirality counts, which means that there is generally a more equal number of the clockwise and counterclockwise chiralities, whereas if we have DMI in the material, there is a preferential for the right-handed or the clockwise chiralities in overall throughout many different ground states. So, okay, how does most of this relate practically, right? So what is the practical relevance of these simulations? So we turn to some remarkable experimental findings where we see that at some critical value of the in-plane field, where the energy barrier between the block states and the type 2 bubbles is generally equal, thermal fluctuations can induce a sort of switching between these three states. And if we leave this switching happening over a long time, we see that the lattice tends to order itself into a more hexagonal lattice structure. And we can determine the driving force behind this sort of liquid hexatic phase transition by analyzing the fast Fourier transform of this fermion bubble lattice as a function of time. And intriguingly, we observe that the peaks in this fast Fourier transform align with this in-plane field orientation applied, indicating a preferential crystallization direction. So while we have both in-plane and out-of-plane field components, we can credit this phase transition to be in-plane field induced, as that seems to be more favorable for this fermion reorganization.
Harshvardhan,
yes.
Please finish in next 1
yes,
minute.
Yes. This is the last one, yeah. So, so as the bubbles switch between the sort of block and type 2 bubbles, they are constantly elongating and shrinking along this in-plane field direction. And therefore, these fluctuations in the shape and type of the bubbles influence the lattice orientation angle and induce a sort of defect diffusion by agitating this lattice grains and boundaries. So this results in the more uniform skyrmion structure as we demonstrate here. And we indicate that the chirality switching process, which is generated by the in-plane field, plays an important role in the formation of this highly crystalline skyrmion lattice and this dynamic phase transition behavior. So yeah, in conclusion, this sort of flexibility and control that we demonstrate has significant implications for this unconventional computing. Yeah, thank you very much for listening to my talk. For more information, please refer to our very recent publication.
Thank you, Harshvardhan. So now we are open for the questions. Any questions? Okay, Harshvardhan, I think in slide 4 or somewhere you showed you did the micromagnetic simulation, the LLG equations, right?
Yeah.
So you did these, I think these are finite differential models, right?
Generally, yes. Yeah. So that's
so you do
the
these
implementation. Yeah. Sorry.
So you do these modelings at room temperature, or you give some thermal input also?
So these are generally ground state simulations. So we basically ignore temperature and we say that, okay, if we have a very strong damping constant and we force the spins to relax to the effective field due to the interactions by the other micromagnetic cells in the simulation. So there is no temperature in these simulations yet. However, this behavior is not expected to change significantly with temperature, because experimentally what we find is that, okay, as long as you're under the Curie limit for this material, this sort of lattice reorganization still takes place.
And what is the typical cell size you choose for these simulations? Yes.
Normally the cell size is around maybe 2 nanometers, and we generally have a lattice of I think it's like 200, 300, like 300 by 300 cells, basically.
Yeah, it should be less than the coherence length.
Yes. So we are verified.
In XYZ,
in
XYZ, you take 2 nanometer each, right?
Yes, yeah. That's correct, yes. So in general, we found that for this material, the exchange length using the parameters that we have is somewhere close to 4.5 to 5 nanometers. So we've made sure that our cell size is less than that.
So do you believe or think, like, if you change the this cell size in your simulations, it will means you get different results, or
No, so we've tested that, and no, in general, as
okay.
long as we maintain this, that the cell size is less than the exchange length, we find that the results are
Okay.
consistent. Yeah.
Okay. So Maud, we have a question from Maud. Maud, you can ask.
Yeah, thank you, Harsh, for the nice presentation. I have a question about the slide where you compare the experiment to the theoretical results. Why the
Do you mean this one here?
here one.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one. Why the in-plane fields are 4 times larger in the theory part?
So generally that just happens because there is because these micromagnetic simulations are done in a more pristine environment as compared to the experimental case. You know, in the experiment you might have some sort of substrate as well, and you know there are some other more defect-based interactions that are taking place, whereas that's not considered at this stage in theory.
Have you tried to include the defects? Because I know that in MUMAX it's easy to do these kind of things, and maybe they can also change the results you have been showing. So if you tried, can you comment on this? If not, do you have any idea of what is the effect expected in the case you add disorder to the system?
Generally, I think we would not expect any significant deviation. So again, so the sort of difference between the experiment and theory, just the value of the in-plane field is mostly a scaling difference because of the way that we have our input parameters. If we can add some defects, and we can see what that looks like. However, I don't think that it significantly changes the sort of chirality switching based mechanism of this phase transition.
Okay, thank you
If that
very
answers
much.
the question. Yeah, thank you very much.
So we have a last question from Nitish Singh. So he's asking, does oxide bilayer interface has DMI interaction? Let's say we have ferromagnet and antiferromagnet heterostructure.
I'm not entirely sure on that. I'm not sure I could comment accurately on that right now.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.